Hello and welcome to the Rest is Politics US with me, Anthony Scaramucci.
And me, Katty K.
How are you, Katty? It's uneventful weeks here in politics in the United States.
Yeah, do you remember when I called you up to say, do you want to do this show, Anthony? And don't worry, it's going to take like an hour of your time every week. You'll be able to fit it in with all the other gazillion things you do. And what are we doing? We're doing like a show every day and it's consuming your life. So I feel like I owe you an apology straight up.
Well, you don't owe me an apology. It's been great fun. And I do want to tell viewers and listeners that you called me and said they do a show called The Rest is Politics UK. Do you want to try to do this with me? Let's go to the goal hanger guys and ask them. And so I have to confess, I had no idea who the goal hanger guys were, but I love these guys.
At least you answered my text. So
yes, exactly. I love these guys. So I just want to just say that.
Right then, enough self-promotion here for us and the team. Let's get on with the show. Today, we are going to be looking at how the Trump campaign is shifting gear. They've got a new opponent that they have to deal with.
By the way, Katty Kate, there's never enough self-promotion.
Yeah.
Okay? I just want to point that out
See,
to you. Okay?
I'm still not American. When I get that US passport, will it come with a big dose of self-promotion? That's what I'm hoping for.
I hope so.
I'm going to make sure you're there at the citizenship ceremony when I get it, by the way. So they've got this new opponent and the ranks have closed really now around Kamala Harris. You know, there's no chance other than that she's going to be the Democratic nominee, barring another massive news story, and we've had enough of those in the last few weeks. So before we get into the Trump campaign's plans for running against Kamala Harris, we should talk about Joe Biden's big speech that he made on Wednesday night from the Oval Office, telling the American people that he was doing this for democracy, for the American people, for the Democratic Party. He noticeably didn't really talk about why he was stepping aside. He defended his legacy and said he felt that he could have served for another 4 years. He didn't get into his health. He didn't get into the debate. He didn't get into the concerns about whether he was the right person to run against Donald Trump. But it'll certainly be a historic speech because this happens almost never in American politics, that somebody in power hands over. I don't think, Anthony, that any Democrats would have, listening to that speech, would have come away and thought, oh my God, we made the wrong decision. He should still be our candidate. Poignant though the speech was.
Well, you know, I had a couple of reactions. So the first one, if he's 51 with his record, he's not making that speech. He's running. He had a bad debate. Let's take on Donald Trump in the second debate. But he's not 51. He's 81. This is an appearance business. You and I both know that. It's a content business, but it's also a sizzle and appearance business. And he looked terrible. If you just want me to be brutally honest, he almost had Donald Trump-like orange makeup on his face. And his hands and his face looked very different from a makeup perspective. You're a television person. I only play a television person on TV. You could see those differences. And the public picks that up. And so there was something off about him last night. He looked more relaxed, though, Katty. Mm-hmm. I felt that if he was that relaxed going into the debate, when they had no more stakes, political stakes on the table, I did see that about his personality. And he did say one thing, and I'd love to have you react to it. He more or less said, because I read through the transcript, I'm stepping back to protect democracy. So it was almost like it was an admission, hey, man, because that's Joe Biden. He says, hey, man, I looked at the poll numbers and I'm not going to be able to win. I'm not going to be able to beat Donald Trump. So I'm going to take myself out of the race.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, it was the same message he gave in 2020, right? That this is a fight for democracy against the forces of autocracy. And here he is 4 years later as he's leaving the White House saying he feels he still needs to do what he can to defend American democracy. And the implicit message, of course, of that 11-minute address was the stakes are very high and I'm not the person to give us the best shot. I thought it was touching to see the scenes of his family. It was nice that the White House cameras let us see that afterwards. And there was clearly a lot of emotion in the room. He had his kids, he had his grandkids there. His wife was there. Of course, there were tears in the room. This is a guy who has wanted his whole life to be the president. And this is the speech he never hoped to be giving. And on a personal level, it is very sad for him. But I think, his legacy to some extent won't be written until after the November election, because if Kamala Harris doesn't win in November, and we're going to talk about how the Trump campaign is going to try and make sure that she doesn't, then there will be questions about whether he held on too long and whether he should have stepped down earlier, not just, straight after the debate, but back in March or even possibly last summer and being that transitional president he told the country he was going to be now on Wednesday night.
So I get I'm sure you get these comments too. I get viewers and listeners that send me notes. And one of the notes that I got this week that I'd like to address on the air is, why is the Black Caucus so welded to Joe Biden? I mean, they didn't move. It didn't matter what was happening. I just want to point out to people 3 quick things. Number one, Joe Biden accepted the vice presidential nomination from the first Black American, African American presidential candidate. That's number one. Number
Barack
two,
Obama.
Barack Obama, Joe Biden. Number two, he put the first African American Black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court. Number three, he put Kamala Harris on the ticket. Okay. And the fourth one now is he steps out of the race and he endorses an African American, Indian American woman to be the American president. So when people say, well, why is the Black Caucus so welded to him? The Black Caucus sees him as an icebreaker. They see him as somebody that is helping them get to where everyone else wants to be in America, which is without racial identity. Just judge me, as Dr. King said, on the content of my character. And Biden has done that. And that's going to be a very, very big part of his legacy, Katty. I just want to flip over to, we used to call him the Orange Maniac. Now we'll refer to him as the presidential candidate, the Republican presidential candidate, Donald Trump. Did you see any of his rally last night?
I mean, it was interesting, wasn't it? The stark contrast on that day between, there was Joe Biden talking about democracy, talking in these kind of lofty, soaring tones with the language of the kind of Oval Office, the historic
invoking
nature,
the Declaration of Independence,
talking about the portraits and the statues of American presidents arrayed in his office, invoking previous occupants of that office. And the role of America in the world, the role of the people in American democracy, a line, by the way, that Kamala Harris also used in Indianapolis, saying this is, the people's election. This is power from the people, not from an autocrat. And on that same day, you had Donald Trump telling rally goers in Charlotte, North Carolina, look, they told me to be good. I'm going to drop that. That's done now. I'm back. Donald Trump is back. And by the way, this is a stupid country. I mean, I don't know if the word Reaganian exists, but it certainly should do. That was not Reaganian.
That's very American of you, making up words. Could get the George W. Bush
One of the
award.
things we all loved about George W. Bush is that he shouldn't be misunderestimated. Was, anyway, so it was not the soaring rhetoric that we heard in the Oval Office. It was, listen, Joe Biden seemed old. He was old. He stumbled a bit. His voice was mild. And I think a lot of Democrats will have listened to that and think, you know what, we made exactly the right decision. He had to go. He cannot be the standard bearer for the speech. But if you just read that speech compared to, this is a stupid country run by stupid people, and I'm not going to be nice anymore, there's a difference. Right? I mean, there's a difference.
That's the real question for the people of the United States, because if you want to go with hard divisiveness and bitterness and shit-talking America, then you want Donald Trump. If you want to try something more aspirational or loftier, you probably don't want him. I want you to react to something, though, because you know these people better than me. Donald Trump said about Nancy Pelosi that she turned on Joe Biden. She turned on him like a dog, and she's crazy as a bed bug. And so what's your reaction? Now, the very famous quote from Harry Truman, if you want a friend in Washington, buy a dog.
Yeah.
When I was in Washington getting my ass kicked, I'm like, even the dogs are biting here in Washington. So what do you think of that? And
I never thought that I never thought the day would come when Donald Trump sort of seemed to be putting himself on the same side as Nancy Pelosi. That was kind of weird. You didn't see that coming. I thought bed bugs were a thing in Paris in hotels last year in the run-up to the Olympics, not something in Washington. That was kind of weird. But look, clearly what he is trying to do is stoke divisions in the Democratic Party. And play on the fact that this is a party that is not united, coming out of the RNC where the Republican Party was very united, and getting into the as we head into the Democratic National Convention, trying to say there are people in the Democratic Party that would rather have had Joe Biden, perhaps, or they're playing unfair. They've been raising these questions, and let's get into this about how they're going to counter Kamala Harris. They've been raising these questions about whether she can legitimately get the money from the campaign so far, whether somehow the whole process is legitimate. Donald Trump has also said, hold on a second, on Truth Social, it was Joe Biden that got all of those primary votes. Ironically, it's the same language that Joe Biden has been using. It was Joe Biden that got those primary votes. They can't just switch in the middle of the race like this. So I think he's trying to undermine the legitimacy of her candidacy and press the divisions in the Democratic Party.
Will that work?
Not at the moment, no. I mean, I think you've got this extraordinary unity in the Democratic Party. I think, look, it's interesting reading the Wall Street Journal op-ed pages this week, because that bastion of kind of, super liberal Marxist thinking is clearly sending a message to Republicans, get your shit together, because the way you're attacking Kamala Harris at the moment isn't working. They're very critical of how the Republicans are trying to prosecute the case up until now against Kamala Harris, saying, look, don't play the DEI card. Don't play the childless cat lady card, which is something that J.D. Vance had said about Kamala Harris, that she's a childless cat lady and therefore has no stake in the American society. Don't talk about her laughter. Don't talk about her gender. I mean, it's actually echoing what Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, has been saying. Don't talk about her gender. Don't talk about her race. Talk about the policies. But sometimes Donald Trump can't help himself.
Well, I mean, that's the big issue. And so he keeps doing that. You're going to have lines of people. They're not going to care about water. They'll wait 8 hours online. They don't care. They will vote for her. So call her dumb as a rock, say she's a DEI candidate, try to get those sexist comments in there like you did with Hilary Clinton, and you watch how the electorate responds to that. In preparation for this podcast this morning, I read a July 2013 article in Vanity Fair, which was written about Kamala Harris, and it was written by J.J. Abrams. And so if you've got young listeners on this podcast, they know who J.J. Abrams is.
Can we do the Star Wars tune at this point?
Yeah, exactly. He's Star Wars. He was Star Trek. He was all of the sci-fi stuff. But he writes in this article, quote unquote, she has movie star looks. If you don't believe me, ask President Obama. She just secured a $20 billion settlement from the state's mortgage fraud for the state's mortgage fraud victims. And Kamala Harris, if she emerges as the Kamala Harris that was written about in July of 2013, 11 years ago, Kamala Harris is about to shock the world in terms of what her skill set is and capability. Moreover, one last point, on the 4th of July, when your wonderful country was having an election and we were blowing fireworks off here in my country, we both talked about her rise. We both suggested to people that she's coming and she'll likely be arriving before the end of July. And so the question now, and I want to pose it to you if you don't mind, which Kamala Harris are we getting? Are we getting the J.J. Abrams version, movie star looks, star quality, great prosecutor, on her way to the Senate? Or are we getting the vice president who was a little sheltered, somewhat awkward, loves Venn diagrams, that sort of thing? Which one are we getting, Katty K?
That Venn diagrams attack is one of the more curious, where the Republicans put out talking points suggesting that the two ways that Republicans should go after Kamala Harris were because of her laugh and because of her love of Venn diagrams. I'm not sure how many Venn diagram primary issue voters there are in the country. Maybe there are some, but anyway, that seemed pretty weird.
But I can explain that because I'm inside Trump's brain. It's very rough in there. Okay, I'm moving around. You need like 3 miners caps and shit. I mean, it's bad in there. But I know why he's doing that, because she repeats it. Okay, and when someone's repeating something, in Trump's mind, they're unsure of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so she's saying she likes Venn diagrams. Trump's implying she doesn't know what a Venn diagram is. You see what I mean? He's trying to imply that she's stupid because of the way she talks about it.
That is meta psychology.
Listen, if you ever need a Trump decoder ring, Katty, I don't know if that's something that would interest you and your family. You just call me. I have them here in the drawer of my desk. I can tell you exactly how this political beast thinks about everything. But go ahead. Which version of Katty K are we getting?
Which version of Kamala Harris are we getting?
I'm scared of Kamala Harris. I'm sorry. Which version of Kamala Harris are we getting?
Unfortunately, I was not born in the United States, so I can't run for president quite yet.
No, I like this. I like to sort of be on record. I like this version of Katty K, but we're talking about Kamala Harris. Go ahead.
So I think the honest answer is we don't know yet, but the early indications are that has got a lot better, certainly since her 2019-2020 run. She performed well in Delaware. She gave a very good speech in Indianapolis. She has made good executive decisions by conducting hundreds of phone calls, including with literally tens of thousands of Black voters, Black men and Black women. So, and she is developing a good message about her campaign being about the future. And she is prosecuting the case against Donald Trump more effectively than Joe Biden is. She has a very good hire, by the way, Brian Fallon, as her communications director, who wrote that speech that she gave in Delaware. And I know that Brian, for example, and the team have been working absolutely nonstop since the debate. They all realized this was a possibility straight after that debate. And they have been working to make sure this rollout of her taking over the nomination was as successful and as speedy as possible. So I would say she's a huge improvement on the candidate that we saw in 2019, 2020. We probably have to give her a little bit longer out on the stump to say, is she going to be a political star? And how worried should the Republicans be?
I mean, I think it's well said. I guess the secondary question, though, for me is, what country are we in right now? Are we in a centrist country, a center-right country, or a center-left country? And I actually think we're in sort of a jigsaw puzzle, meaning there's pockets of our ideology that is center-left. I think women want reproductive choices. They want reproductive freedom. I think the average man, frankly, wants that for women. And so that's one pocket. The other pocket, though, is America is a capitalist country. The business of America is business. I do still believe that. Calvin Coolidge said that 100 plus years ago, but I do believe it's still true today. And so are they going to land any punches on her by describing her as uber liberal and out of touch with this jigsaw puzzle that I'm describing?
Yeah, I think that's exactly where they're heading. And that's probably their strongest suit. I think you're right. I mean, there's been fascinating research recently showing the divergence in political leanings between young men and young women, not just in the United States, but in Europe as well, with young women being much more liberal than young men on a whole host of issues. But in my contacts with people around Trump and who are advising the campaign and working for the campaign over the last few days, it's pretty clear that what they're going to do is, as I said on Sunday night with Rory and Alistair, they're really going to push on this idea that she's dangerously liberal. The Trump campaign believes that the country is still actually a center-right country. And so they're going to go after her record as a prosecutor where she didn't apply, for example, for the death penalty for certain criminals. They are digging into all of those stories around her prosecutorial legacy in California. Where did she, from their point of view, mess up? Where was she too soft on criminals? Expect to hear all of those stories out on the campaign, in ads again. And I think Mike Johnson, when he made those comments about don't go after her personality, is speaking directly to Donald Trump. Go after the issues. They'll paint her as too liberal on the economy. They'll paint her as too liberal on the border. Obviously, that's another big vulnerability for her. So on her record in California, and they'll paint her as the person that came out of San Francisco rather than coming out of Middle America. What do you think of kind of all of that stew of things is going to be their most effective attack against her?
I mean, I think you're onto it. I mean, you've got the searchlight in the right places, but I mean, just to tell you about Donald Trump for a moment. Okay, he does not have the narrative in his head yet. He's still free forming that narrative. He doesn't know where to go. His nickname sucks, by the way. He always goes with the lying nickname. Okay, if he can't find another nickname, he knows he can't use cackling. He tried cackling, so well, that's way too sexist. That's going to blow me up. We're going to have thousands and tens of thousands of women waiting online to shoot me down. So he doesn't know where to go. He called her the most liberal vice president in U.S. history, the worst vice president in U.S. history. These are pablums, Katty. These are not direct blows to Kamala Harris. So he's right now in the verbal sparring gym, and he's trying to figure out what punches are actually going to land on her. He doesn't know what punches are going to land on her yet. Neither does his team. Dave Urban, a friend of mine, obviously I campaigned with David in Pennsylvania on behalf of Donald Trump in 2016. I know David well. He's often on CNBC. He's one of their contributors. He says she's complicit in every bad decision that Joe Biden made. Okay, David probably doesn't listen to our podcast, but I would tell David that's not going to land. Okay,
Why not?
Joe Biden,
Why doesn't that land? I think
that
that's
doesn't
one of their
land because,
stronger lines.
yeah, I don't think it lands because she wasn't president.
Right, but she's part of the administration.
I get it, but she has this opportunity, tabula rasa, right now to say, that was his presidency. I fell in line with him on lots of these decisions. This is my identity. This is my political footprint and fingerprint. This is where I live.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's going to land. And maybe it will. But listen, my thing with her is she's got to define herself differently than the vice presidential tenure defined her. And that's going to be difficult for her, but I think it's doable. And we'll have to see how she sculpts that. But again, my message would be, hey, I was vice president for Joe Biden. I was following his lead. I had views when I was a senator. I had views when I was an attorney general. I'm now running for president. This is president for all people. Okay. And so here is the slack in my views. Here's the things that I've moved on. And here are the reasons why. And if she does that, it'll be very, very compelling. If she stays anchored to things, he's going to blast her because he's very, very good at it, Katty.
If you're looking at, say you were still advising the Trump campaign, Anthony, which I know you are not, but say you put that hat on for a second as a strategist, what would your advice to them be on the most fruitful line of attack against Kamala Harris to try and make sure they win in November? Where would you tell them to go?
You're going to get me in trouble with a lot of our listeners. Okay, they're going to comment and say, "Mooch, knock it off." Okay, don't be telling them this shit. Here's two things. Okay, number one, you never give Donald Trump advice in front of other people. That's number one. So if you're on Trump's campaign listening to this, you have a good idea for Donald Trump, you got to wait to get him alone. Because the minute you give him advice in front of other people, he won't like the fact that you're giving him that advice. It means that he's not doing something right. And it makes him very insecure and he'll start bullying you. That's number one. Number two, if I was advising President Trump, which I'm not, but if I was advising President Trump, I would say, wait. I would not even talk about her. I would talk about you. I would talk about the economy that you, quote unquote, built. I would talk about the muscularity of what you're representing to the United States. I would wait because once she starts landing her punches and once she starts framing her platform, it's going to be easier for you to figure out where the weakness is. And I think he's making a mistake right now. He's flailing a little bit with the way he's talking about her, and they're shooting at her, but she hasn't really concretized, if that's even a word. She hasn't even concretized the foundational platform that she's going to run on and what she represents, if that makes sense. I would wait.
Okay, so that's the strategist, and that's the kind of, the tactics you would use. But where do you, as an observer of the field, think she's most vulnerable?
She's most vulnerable on business issues. She's most vulnerable on fracking.
She called for a ban on fracking.
Yeah, she did. She wanted a national ban on fracking. They have her on tape saying it during the primaries. If you still feel that way, bye-bye Pennsylvania.
A big fracking state.
Yeah, and if you look at the maps, and maybe at some point we should look at the maps and we should explain to viewers and listeners the way these guys get to the presidency. Donald Trump has more roots to the presidency than Kamala Harris. So he just does, okay, because he's got Florida locked up. That used to be a swing state. And so he can lose certain states, win others. He's fine. She has to win certain states. She's got to get back to the blue wall of Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. So if you're a anti-fracker, you're not going to win Pennsylvania. Just to give you the heads up on that. She's got to modify that view. But in addition to that, She had the opportunity to speak at the Bitcoin conference. I know this isn't a Bitcoin podcast, but I'm a big Bitcoiner. There are 40 or 50 million wallets. Trump understood that immediately. He's speaking on Saturday. She had the opportunity to do it. David Bailey, who runs the conference, a personal friend of mine, he gave her the opportunity to speak. She wanted to do it by Zoom. He said, I can't do that. RFK Jr. is coming in person. Donald J. Trump is coming in person. You have to come in person. She bailed. It was a bad move by her. It was a bad move by her campaign. I don't think she understands how many young people own digital assets. And I would have said to her,
Interesting.
"What the hell are you doing? Take the 3 hours, fly to Nashville, make the speech, tell people you're pivoting. Okay, even if you get booed on that stage, it's good for you. You're telling people
You're showing up.
I'm showing up. I'm pro business.
Yeah.
I'm listening to you people. Remember, I grew up, or I represented the most innovative state and arguably one of the most innovative economies that ever existed in the world. That would be the state of California, and I'm here for you." She didn't do that. So those are. And by the way, she's overscheduled, and so I'm sure the pushback would be, Anthony, I'm sorry, I got too much to do. I wanted to be there, I couldn't. But then put out a statement.
Right.
Say, hey, listen, I don't have the
I've
Biden.
suddenly been thrown into an election campaign with not very long, and I've got to be everywhere.
Yeah, and I don't have the Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Gary Gensler view of crypto. I mean, that would be a big opening for her.
I think what you're saying is the same thing that I was raising, which is that they're going to paint her as too liberal. I'm too liberal for America, whether it's on business, whether it's on fracking, whether it's on her prosecutorial record, whether it's on the death penalty. This is going to be the rap again, or on the border, that she's out of step with America. And I think if they're smart, they'll go for those issues and drop this stuff about she's a DEI vice president or her laugh, or because I think, like you said, that just alienates people.
That's not going to work.
On the waiting stuff, though, by the way, they're clearly not listening to you, because AP had this great breakdown of the numbers. Since Monday, when it was pretty clear she is going to be the nominee, I'm reading this so I don't get it wrong, Trump and his allies are outspending Harris's team 25-1 on television and radio advertising. And there is an argument that actually they need to get out and start spending fast, because they don't have long. They need to define her, and they need to define her before the Trump team defines her. I'm not sure how effective all of that $68 million that they've spent since Monday on ads has been, if it's been the kind of stuff that is defining her personality. But I know that some of it has been defining her as too liberal on the issues. And there's been one out of Pennsylvania using a quote from the guy running for the Senate there saying, listen, you can't, exactly what you said, that she was opposed to fracking and that's not going to fly in Pennsylvania. But nobody is waiting when it comes to spending money.
So just a couple of reactions. So I would tell her, dust off the 2008 Barack Obama playbook. Mm-hmm. You've got to get out there. You got to talk a little bit about your heritage like Barack Obama did. You got to talk about your family. I think people will be very interested in that. And you've got to speak pro-business, because you already have liberal chops. You have liberal bona fides. You got to talk pro-business, and you will be able to get independents on board. They'll be like, okay, she's for reproductive freedom. She's not going to hurt my business. And by the way, did Joe Biden hurt my business? The answer is no. Economy's at an all-time high. Economy's improving, doing better. Did Barack Obama hurt my business? Well, he came in during the financial crisis. Things got a lot better over the 8 years that Barack Obama was running the economy. I am a descendant of Barack Obama and Joe Biden. I am not as liberal as Donald Trump wants you to believe. I grew up and represented the state of California, and I'm here to make sure you're doing well in business, but you have your personal reproductive freedom.
And by the way, there are fewer people crossing the American border in the South today than there were on the last day of Donald Trump's presidency. I think you're right. She has to keep saying inflation is down, unemployment is low.
Yeah, they're going to step away from that border czar stuff. They will step away from that because of what you just said.
Yeah.
They don't want to put fire on what you just said.
Yeah, and I heard from somebody in Mexico City after our last podcast where we were talking about Claudia Sheinbaum, the new president of Mexico, who was saying exactly what we were saying, which is watch that relationship. If I was Kamala Harris, I would have President Sheinbaum's number on speed dial and just make sure the Mexicans keep those people away from the border until November, until the election. The producer is asking us how much attention do voters actually pay to all of these $68 million worth of ads that the Republicans have spent till Monday. Look, the ads get seen by people. They're still, you'd think perhaps that traditional TV ads have less weight, but a lot of this money is now going into digital ads. They're popping up on TikTok, they're popping up on Instagram, people are seeing them. Particularly older voters are seeing the ones that still run on television. They still help to define a candidate.
Spoken like a true TV journalist. Look at that. Okay. Oh my God, I'm very proud of you. See, if I was your agent, I'd be like, oh, that was a brilliant analytical statement.
And with that, I think we'll
Nobody gives a shit about these TV ads. Nobody. I mean, they like glaze over.
They look, the clips come up on, but you think you spend $68 million for nothing? You spend it because it has some kind of an impact. It pops up on people's. I know TikTok is probably more important. And by the way, she's killing it on TikTok.
In my next life, I'm going to be Katty K's agent, signing her media contracts. And she's such a good advocate for TV.
Yeah. That's my job. We are going to talk in this half, Anthony, about what's changed from the last time a woman ran for president in 2016 and what it was like in that campaign that you were part of, the framing of how to deal with her as a woman candidate, because there was kind of a lot of talk about sexism in that campaign. And I'm just wondering how much the landscape has changed. And look, taking a leaf out of your playbook from the last episode we did, I went and looked at some numbers too, because there can't just be one professor on this show. So I thought, listen, Anthony can come up with numbers. I better go and dig out the data. You've raised my game, Anthony. So in 2016, 5% of CEOs were women. In 2024, 10% of CEOs are women. So the numbers doubled. In 2016, 87 women served in the House of Representatives. In 2024, it's 122. So we've gone from 87 congresswomen to 122 congresswomen. We've gone from 20 female senators to 25 female senators, and they're now a record 12 female governors. Look, those numbers are nowhere near where I would like them to be, obviously, but on every one of those metrics, we've seen more women in positions of power in the United States. And I think that every time a woman gets elected into the House of Representatives or gets elected into the Senate or gets elected as a governor, it kind of chips away at the barrier to entry for other women. So I do think that the landscape is different. I also think, since 2016, when you were helping on Donald Trump's campaign, we've had the Me Too movement, which has kind of changed the way that the media talks about sexism generally. I think it's changed public awareness of sexism generally. And of course, we've had the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision, which has put women's rights, reproductive rights, at the heart and center of American politics. So I think you've had kind of three big shifts. You've had more women coming into power. You've had the Me Too movement, which has changed public perception about the kinds of barriers that women face. And then you've had Dobbs, which has made this, an election that perhaps isn't going to be about the economy, but is going to be about women. So I think in that way, the landscape for Kamala Harris is very different from the landscape for Hilary Clinton. Am I being too Pollyanna-ish about this?
No, I think it's a brilliant assessment of everything. I just think because I love asking you questions. So if you don't mind, I want to fire this question out at you. Hillary Clinton, to us, when we worked on the Trump campaign in 2016, we thought she was going to win. And we looked at everything. Bannon thought she was going to win.
And by the way, she did win the popular vote by 3 million votes. She won
the popular vote, but she did things that we could never understand. Okay, so she left the July Democratic Convention in 2016, did not travel to the state of Wisconsin, not once. Mm-hmm. She went to Pennsylvania once. I think she went to Michigan twice. Donald Trump was in that state, double digits on every one of those. In fact, I remember the night 48 hours before the campaign ended, I think he was in New Hampshire, and he flew himself to Michigan for one more 1 a.m. rally before he came back to the New York headquarters. So he was leaving everything on the field. She wasn't. And so we're with Donald Trump because of that candidacy. Moreover, I would like to have you react to this. Joe Biden wanted to run against her, wanted to primary her. He was stopped by Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to really give people some trivia here. What happened? Obama was a little shaky in 2011 into 2012. He went to the Clintons. He said, I need your full throated endorsement. And they said, no problem, but you've got to endorse Hillary in 2016. He said, no problem. If you go back 12 years to the Democratic convention, the speech that Bill Clinton gave was a phenomenal, full throated endorsement of Barack Obama. And that pushed Obama to stop Biden. So we're sitting here talking about all the demography and the uber hyper extended masculinity, overcompensating masculinity of Donald Trump. But all of this stuff is reaction and then formation to reaction, Katty, meaning if the Democrats had handled this differently, Donald Trump would have never been on that stage. They would be going against more garden variety Republicans. And I want your reaction to that. Am I wrong on that? Because that's something all of us thought 8 years ago in that campaign.
You're clearly right on the Obama-Biden stuff, and that kind of complicated relationship, and Obama endorsing Hillary Clinton and framing it as kind of the time had come for a woman to be president of the United States, which a lot of women believed back in 2016. They kind of, a lot of women voters hoped that was going to be the case. I don't know that what you're saying though gets to her gender. I mean, she ran a bad campaign by not going to Wisconsin.
No, I'm saying that her gender actually didn't matter.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Are you suggesting that her gender didn't matter? Because I think she has said, and she wrote an op-ed in the New York Times this week saying that there was definitely sexism. There was a lot of focus. She was called, as she said in the New York Times, all the kinds of things that she was called, during the course of that campaign and the kind of ugly prejudice that she faced. Are you suggesting that didn't play into the 2016 result?
No, it did. No. I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that if she did the work in the campaign, despite the sexism, despite the attacks, despite the glass ceiling that she perhaps felt and women of her generation felt in the United States her whole life, she would have won. Mm-hmm. And she was that close to winning. He had to create an inside straight, is what we were calling it. He had to win Pennsylvania and Michigan. He had to win Wisconsin. He had to break the blue wall. He did that. He won. He lost the popular vote by, 7 to 8 million votes, but he still won. He's never won the popular vote. And what's interesting now, he may win the popular vote this time. It could be the first time that he could win it. But I'm saying something different. I'm saying if she had won, the sexism would not have been a big issue in 2024. I'm just giving some alternative history because this stuff goes. I think I want viewers and listeners to know you're on a knife's edge in a campaign. You're on a knife's edge in terms of your decision making, and certain things that you're doing, going left or right, are going to affect people's analysis later on. But perhaps it's more broad than that. It's less deeply analytical. It's very superficial. Go to Wisconsin, do the work. If I'm Kamala Harris, do the work. You're an energetic person. Fly yourself everywhere to the point of exhaustion.
But I think that's true. And look, Donald Trump, repeatedly in 2016 questioned Hillary Clinton's strength, her stamina. He mocked her voice. I think those were things that were seen as kind of dog whistles about her gender, that she wasn't up to being president. She couldn't because a woman wasn't strong enough or had the stamina enough. They made a bad call on going to Wisconsin. Clearly, that was a campaign decision, and maybe they were feeling cocky because they felt they had so many paths to 270 electoral college votes. But I think that's a criticism that could be made of any male candidate. I think the interesting question this time around, and I do think there's been a huge sea change in how Kamala Harris is going to be treated as a woman and as a woman of color. I mean, I think, sure, there's going to be sexism. We're already seeing it. The stuff about her laugh is sexist, that the implication is somehow that she's too emotional. And women get told that all the time. Women in positions of power are always getting told that they're too emotional to run things. But I think there is a real change in the sense that there's a public awareness of that kind of stuff and a willingness to call that out, which is why you've got Republicans falling over themselves to distance themselves from the kind of stuff that J.D. Vance has been found to have said about Kamala Harris, about that stuff of being a childless cat lady. I like my cats.
There's an American thing that we do called rotisserie baseball. I don't know if they do rotisserie football in the UK, but
I have no
we
idea what that
pick.
means.
Okay, so we pick players and we analyze the players and they go play. What if Trump had picked Nikki Haley? Where would the Trump campaign be right now? Where would he be in the pollings vis-a-vis Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I think that would have been a much smarter play for him. I mean, it helps him, of course, with the center of the country. It helps him, especially with Kamala Harris running, right? They couldn't foresee that Kamala Harris was going to run.
Helps him with the sexism.
Helps him hugely with people of color, with the center of the country, and with suburban women voters, those mythical suburban women voters.
So why didn't he pick her? Because I know the answer, but I'm curious as to what you think the answer is. Go ahead. Why didn't he pick her?
Don't you think he was feeling in that moment, first of all, I don't think he could have picked her because he could never have got over the things she said about him. It just was too hard for him to have a woman attack him in public like that and then forgive that woman. In a way that somehow he has been able to do with J.D. Vance, the stuff about him being cultural heroin or cultural opium or whatever the drug was.
Well, maybe he liked being called Hitler by J.D. Vance. Listen, in 1980, George Herbert Walker Bush eviscerated Ronald Reagan on the campaign trail. Excuse me. He called him every name in the book, vacuous, dangerous, conservative cowboy. He used the term voodoo economics when describing his economic plan. And the Reagan people were upset. Reagan himself was upset. When push came to shove, they picked George Herbert Walker Bush because they picked him for the win. And Reagan said, I'll deal with it personality wise. Donald Trump, two things. I don't want anybody getting credit for my win. I am such an uber narcissist. I am bringing everybody over the finish line by myself. So I don't want anybody on this campaign that could possibly say to a journalist, I helped Donald Trump win the election. Number one.
Does it make any difference whether that person is a woman or a man, or none in his mind?
Well, we're going to get into the secondary thing. Okay. I am anti-DEI.
Yeah.
I am anti
Read Project
affirmative
2025.
action.
That's what it's
Yes,
about.
I am white America. I want America to go back to 1947 where there were no blacks in baseball. That's me. I'm red meat, white America. You know what his favorite meal is? Okay, I want my steak well done. Okay, and I want a ton of Heinz ketchup.
Mhm.
Can you pass me a Diet Coke? I want my steak well done, and I need a whole bottle of Heinz ketchup. As my mother would say, Marona me, is this guy, go goots, right? I mean, which is, you got a chicken running in your head. Okay. But this is what he is. And so he boxed himself here, Katty. He's got J.D. Vance. He had so many opportunities to lock this up for him, but he didn't. And now he's up against the sexist charge. And it's a totally different America than the one he ran in. And it's a totally different America than the one that he wants to live in. And so it'll be very interesting to see if her team can calibrate itself to handle that. And I believe that they will, because I think they're learning from the Clinton campaign what she did. And I give her credit, by the way. I give Secretary Clinton credit. She's open about it. She's writing op-eds about it. And I'm certain she wants Kamala Harris to win. And I'm sure she's advising.
Yeah, I mean, there is this sort of the disconnect between the way the world has changed and I think what J.D. Vance and that comment about childless cat ladies and how she is one of those and therefore she doesn't have a stake in America. And it's not just him, by the way. There's been, this guy, Will Chamberlain. I'm looking him up if you feel like it on Twitter. He's a kind of conservative MAGA exponent with a kind of pretty big following. And he has said on Twitter, look, she shouldn't be president because she doesn't have kids. There is a kind of view out there of America should be a sort of 1950s America. And, as Kamala Harris said in Indianapolis this week, they want to pull you back to that. I mean, it's not just on terms of reproductive rights, but there's this sort of sense of, well, these guys who are white guys who feel that power is slipping from their fingers, women are earning more money, they're better educated, there are more women for the first time, college-educated women in the workforce than men, and my God, we're about to lose our power, so can we just get women back into the kitchen and out of the office, right? I mean, I think there is that sort of sense out there. I just think that, yes, there's some of that, and there was some of that in 2016, but against that is a pretty strong realization that you can call that stuff out now in a way that perhaps you didn't before Me Too. And that a lot of women and a lot of men, as we saw in all of those referendums on abortion, don't particularly like to see their wives' rights being taken away on healthcare issues or on other issues. So I think the landscape has changed, and that's why you've got the Wall Street Journal this week saying, "Listen, Republicans, you've got to figure out how to attack Kamala Harris, because the way that you're doing it, and with Trump, for example, calling Harris dumb as a rock, no woman likes to see another woman being called dumb. No person of color likes to see a person of color being called dumb. It just it grates, right? It rubs them up the wrong way and drives them into the opposite camp. So I think that's what the Trump team is trying to figure out, and it's probably down to Trump's psychology, like you say.
We're contemporaries, you and I, although you look 15 years younger than me.
I like to say that I'm younger, but we don't need
dermatology
to remind people
recommendations
about those
for you.
10 months difference between us. That's okay.
All
It's not that I'm counting or anything.
Let me ask you this question, okay? It's not a statistical question. It's just your gut. Are men of your age afraid of women being in charge?
I think they are.
Okay.
think they still are.
Dad, your mom and dad, my mom and dad, were they afraid of women being in charge?
No, because it didn't really happen very much.
Why are they afraid of women being in charge?
Because as a white man in many societies, in fact, all Western societies, the fact that you had a Y chromosome and the color of your skin gave you an automatic entry to certain positions of power that you now don't have anymore.
Well said. So there's an institutionalization. You're getting the benefit of your anatomy and your skin color because it's more or less been institutionalized, and that defines some levels of power.
Right. And that's slipping away.
So that's the next question. Your children, do they feel the same way?
So I think that's the really interesting question. I think in many ways they don't, because I think my kids, for example, have grown up seeing me always working, and they've grown up seeing their dad working, but also organizing play dates like you do, Anthony, going to PTA meetings, going to school conferences. And I think that's the difference. They've seen the role of men change as much as the role of women change.
So there is the dynamic. This is a major change going on in the demography. And the question is, if the younger voters turn out, she's going to win. And if they don't turn out, if they've decided, you know what, doesn't matter, I'm Mr. and Mrs. Cynical, I'm not going to turn out, it's going to be easier for Trump to beat her. So it'll have to see if she can energize those people. The United States has yet to have a woman president, but there are great women leaders around the world. Katty, of course, your great country had Margaret Thatcher 35, 40 years ago. What do you think is going on culturally?
I mean, it is interesting when you look at countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, the United Kingdom, Israel, all of those countries that have had female leaders. It tends to be in countries where there is a parliamentary system, and that woman rises to the top of her party, and then the voters vote for the party. They're not voting for that woman as a head of state. Now, many of those countries may feel now fine about voting for that woman as a president, but up until now, and particularly early on, I think it was much easier for a woman to be elected in a parliamentary system as a prime minister, because they weren't having to kind of raise the crazy sums of money that American presidential candidates have to raise. People weren't having to go into the ballot box and, vote for Ann Smith. They could vote for the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. And I think that just made it that one step easier for women to rise to the top of politics. Once America has done it, I think they'll have broken that, memory muscle, if you like, of people have of thinking I always have to vote for a man as president, and that record will have been broken, and so it'll be easier a second time around, and it may even be easier this time around because Hilary Clinton was on the ballot in 2016. But I think that's why. I think that's the main difference.
Before we go, if you don't mind, I know we're probably in a little bit of OT. I want to ask you about Barack Obama. No endorsement for Barack Obama. The right-wing media says that's because they think that Kamala Harris can't beat Donald Trump. Why no endorsement from Barack Obama? Go.
So I read less into this than a lot of the media is reading into this. I know that Kamala Harris has long had a close relationship with Barack Obama. She admires him enormously. I think Barack Obama has a complicated relationship with Joe Biden. he was orchestrating a lot of this departure of Joe Biden behind the scenes. But when it came to the actual moment of the transition, I buy the argument that he didn't want to step on Joe Biden's moment. Now, maybe I'm being too naive here and too kind of trusting of the things that I'm hearing from other Democrats, but he's going to come out and endorse her. But I think he needed to put a bit of distance between Joe Biden, who is the sitting president after all, and himself. Am I being like massively naive?
No, I think that's the right read. You know, so I have an Obama whisperer who you and I both know personally, who more or less plays golf with the president fairly regularly on Martha's Vineyard, who said to me he needed to, in his mind, this was a Joe Biden Kamala Harris situation. He needed to stay out of it. He'll be at the convention. He will be out on the campaign stump, and he will do everything he can to help her. But he just wanted it to happen without him. If it was going to be a Mark Kelly or a Josh Shapiro that was going to challenge her, he wanted to be in a position as an elder statesman, still, you know, one of the big leaders in the party, to have some chops with whoever rose to the occasion. If it's Kamala Harris, I know he's fine with her. And I think he is going to be a big part of helping. If she does win, and I'm going to predict here on our show that she will win, he will be a big part of her win.
Yeah.
Okay. Because he understands that electorate that's about 15 years younger than you or I, about as well as anybody. And he'll help her with that messaging. And he's got his campaign team in there right now working with her.
There is no one in American politics who has ever excited Black voters and young voters in the way that Barack Obama has.
No question.
He was a complete rock star, and that was why he turned them out in such huge numbers in 2008. And my prediction is that he and Michelle Obama, who is equally popular, will be out on the campaign trail a lot more, because it is Kamala Harris, and a lot more enthusiastically than they would have been if it's Joe Biden. And that's going to be a massive asset for her. Particularly watch Michelle Obama.
If our podcast continues to do well, I promise an upgrade in my wardrobe. I notice that you're...
No, I like the T-shirts. It's good.
I notice that you're always well-dressed. But the T-shirt I'm wearing, if you're listening on your... I am old enough to remember when we had a functioning democracy, okay? Because that means I'm very old, okay? That's like I'm old as dirt. But I mean, maybe that was an attack by my wife to give me this shirt, but I'm wearing it proudly today, Katty.
Maybe functioning democracy can come back again. God knows we need it. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will be back next week, unless another crazy thing happens in US politics, in which case, of course, we'll be back with more episodes. But I promised Anthony that it's going to be once a week, so let's see if we can stick to that, at least for a little while.
I'm up for anything. It's a lot of fun. It's always great to be on with you.
That's it from The Rest is Politics US. I'm Katty K. Thanks so much for listening.
And I'm Anthony Scaramucci. I hope to see you next week.